Okay. Thanks for tuning in, and I know you got by without me for a few weeks, but I do have a backlog of stuff. But anyone got a transaction issue they want to cover before I get started on what I've got? Okay. And let me start with the last oh, that's not the one I want. Pick the wrong file. Well, this is, are you seeing the flyer for the webinar or something else?
Risk management.
The flyer.
No, the risk.
Oh, you are
of
seeing the,
marketing.
okay.
Yeah.
So, oh, that's funny because it's not showing up on my screen now. Let me do this here. Okay, there it is. So the risks of marketing properties with illegal or non-conforming uses. How often do we get properties with illegal or non-conforming uses?
All the time.
Right. Yeah. Almost all of them, depending on where we are. So, you know, this is a, you know, informative tip. We always have to be cautious about marketing, you know, properties that are legal and non-conforming. I often get a call from an agent. They say, well, the permit or the tax records say it's a 2-bedroom, but it's actually a 3-bedroom. And, you know, we aren't supposed to go look at permits and stuff and, you know, go to tax record. I mean, we can look at tax records, but I always say, well, market the property with as it stands. You know, if it stands as a 3-bedroom and that's how people occupy it, then market as a 3-bedroom. But put in the comments that the tax records only show it as a 2-bedroom. And then the buyer's got to figure out whether that extra bedroom is conforming, legal, and all that other stuff. So we get into a conflict between what we're trying to market, the property as it exists, and what it shows up in at least the tax records. Not very often do we go back and look at the other permits. You know, this scenario shows ADUs. We don't, you know, unless the seller tells us, no, I never got permits on it. We aren't supposed to go to the county and confirm that one way or the other. So these practice tips, if you're listing a property has a questionable structure, inquire of the seller as to whether it's legal or not. And if the seller represents that it's illegal, ensure that they put that in the disclosures, the TDS and the SBQ.
You say how to get those practice tips?
If the property contains a non-conforming use, it's suggested that you refrain from marketing that unit to avoid unwarranted attention from local building officials. Because sometimes we find that the building officials track new listings.
He emails them every week.
Sorry,
You don't get emails from.
I can't hear you.
I'm going to mute Yvonne there. Okay. If you're a listing agent of property with non-conforming use, do not include the square footage of the non-conforming unit. You know, we can only include the square footage from documentation that we have. So if we have an appraisal, we can put it in there and attribute it to the appraiser. If we have a representation from the seller, we can put it in there and attribute it to the seller. So, but we're not in the business of going out and measuring buildings for square footage and putting in our own guess.
I have a question for you, Gary. I've
Yeah,
got
sure.
something I'm not going to list probably for another year, but I had sold it to him a long time ago, and the county records now say the house is 6,250 square feet. Well, no way. If it's 3,000 square foot, we're lucky. So I don't know where the county came up with that square footage, but I've seen it the other way, but not this way.
Is that from Realist that you're finding that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
I
tax
would suggest to the owner that they approach the assessor's office and ask them that.
Yeah, because we both laughed. I mean, because
Yeah.
there's no way.
But-
Okay.
Because that's going to be a problem down the road if it's misrepresented in
Oh.
public records. So I would have the seller call the tax assessor's office and say, hey, I think you have this wrong. Can you?
Yeah, because he had got a permitted extra garage, but still, even if they added that square footage in,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be that. Okay, that's a good thing to know. Thank you.
Okay. Do not use euphemisms common in the industry like bonus room or unwarranted or legal or illegal, as the public may not understand that this is a non-conforming space. If you're representing a buyer in the purchase of a property with a non-conforming unit, recommend the buyer obtain permits. If the buyer is not sure how to obtain permits or check records at their local building department, recommend that the buyer consult with a professional such as an appraiser. And then there was a form attached to this weekly practice tip. I'll send it out again when I send out the recording. But there was a form that was a disclaimer that you have the seller sign saying you're not responsible for these non-conforming and illegal structures and so forth. Any questions on that?
Mm-mm.
Okay. All right, let me just check the chat while it's convenient to do so. Yeah, Cheryl says, so many of our tax records are incorrect. Yep. And there are about 5% county errors in the tax records, according to Curtis there. So those are two things to keep in mind, that often the tax records are not accurate. Related to this is we're talking about property inspections. So let me go here to our RPA. Where's our RPA? Who's our RPA? Let me see. Hold on a second. Might have put it down here. Somehow I lost the RPA. So let me pull that up for a moment. Put you over here. Oh, here it is. Okay. It logged me out for lack of use. So I'm just logging back into ZipForms.
There's nothing for you. No.
So anyway, I'll give you the scenario while this is coming up. We're representing a seller on a very complex property. It's a combination of residential and commercial. It has a fire sprinkler system that relates to the commercial property. The seller got it when it was built, got a permit, and the system is fully permitted, the sprinkler system. The buyer hired a consultant and that installs fire suppression units. And the consultant came back and said, well, it's a residential fire suppression system and it needs to be a commercial system. And it'll cost $250,000. We've done investigations. The seller is using a permit person. He says, no, you have a permit for that. And this county accepted it. You're not required to have a commercial system there because your system is permitted. So we're in a little bit of an arm wrestling match over the $250,000. And we've learned that these fire installation companies can often misquote things because they want to do some work. So that's what we're feeling. Our consultant said that that's not a requirement. So, so what was happening then is the buyer and the buyer's agent wanted to bring in the fire marshal to look at it. Well, seller doesn't want the fire marshal coming on the property or some building inspector, no matter what the conditions are. You know, there's just the potential for other things to be found and problems to be uncovered that the seller doesn't want from having an official, public official on the property. So the seller's wanting to decline the permission for the fire marshal to visit the property during the escrow. And we're encouraging the buyer to figure this out in other ways. Have their consultant show us where a retrofit requirement would be triggered or anything like that. So anyway, our agent called me and said, can the seller refuse to allow the fire marshal on the property? And I said, well, I think there's language in the RPA that around investigations that would cover that. And sure enough, it's here under 12C. And it says, without seller's prior written consent, buyer shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destructive buyer investigations, except for minimally invasive testing required to prepare a pest control report, which shall not include any holes or drilling through stucco or similar material. Okay, that's one. And then two, without seller's prior written consent, buyer shall not have inspections by any governmental building or zoning inspector or government employee unless required by law. So the seller's within his rights there to decline that inspection. Now, I said to our agent, if I were the buyer, I'd say, well, they're trying to hide something. They don't want the building inspector there. But the alternative is the building inspector turns up things that haven't been a problem for the 25 years that the property's existed. You never know what kind of building inspector you're going to get. So anyway, it's yet to be resolved whether the transaction will proceed or not. But I just wanted to point out that part of that clause in the inspections, because it doesn't come up all that often. Any questions on that? Okay. We have a situation where our client is a seller, and as there is with sellers in some markets like this, when the property isn't moving, they said, well, I don't want to reduce my price. Tell everybody I'll be flexible. Tell them they bring an offer, I'll be flexible in responding. So we hear this sometimes in our MLS meetings and stuff like that. Bring us an offer, the seller will consider it. Well, this is what happened in this case. The seller didn't want to reduce the price, but he said, how about if we say you'll consider assisting the buyer with mortgage rate buy down or closing cost credit? And I guess the seller said, okay, that's I would consider that. So now we have a new marketing flyer, and the flyer says buyer incentive. The seller will consider assistance with mortgage rate buy down or closing cost credit. And it raised a bit of a red flag for me because it's a statement, but it doesn't have any kind of bones to it. It says seller will consider assisting. What kind of language is that? And any credit, such as a closing cost credit or a mortgage rate buy down, is subject to the lender's approval. So at the minimum, we should put in that flyer an asterisk and say subject to lender's approval. And with that, our attorneys thought it was okay. So we at least need that disclaimer. The bigger issue is really around getting an offer on the property. So we have
Oh, wow.
Patty, are we still live? Patty?
Yeah, you're still rolling right there.
Okay. Sharon's screen is frozen, I think, maybe, or maybe Sharon's frozen. No, yeah, there you are. Okay. You were just in a pose. Okay. Sorry about that. I used an adage back in the day when we had price considerations like this that goes like this. It says, this is what I'm saying to the seller who's refusing to do a price reduction and not getting any offers and telling me they'll be flexible. I said, well, would you rather be flexible on no offers or firm on some? So, I said, if you have no offers, being flexible doesn't really help, right? So let's get an offer at some price, and then you can be firm. So let's set a price at which you won't go below, and your best price. And if we get an offer at that price, you can be firm. So what happened? Our clients got an offer. This is a separate deal where we're representing a different seller. They got an offer below. The seller had reduced the price twice already. They got an offer 10% below that price. Well, it's not unusual to get an offer 10%, below asking, right? So they said, seller immediately looked at the price and said, I'm rejecting it. It's too low. And I said, well, wait. Our job as agents is to try to kind of mediate the difference. You got to get some dialogue on here, right? So, as has always been said, it's always a combination of price and terms. It's not just price alone. There's terms. So this buyer needs to buy a replacement property. So, the seller needs to buy a replacement property. So what if the buyer, gave you a little lesser price, but you got 2 months of free rent back because you were finding a replacement property, or 3 months, whatever it is, the terms, throw in some terms that are good for you and negotiate on the price. So, so those are two things that work there. And this was also the first offer on the property, even though it's been on the market for over a month, and they had reduced it twice. So that brings in my third adage that I like to share, and that is first offer, best offer. You may reject that offer, but it's your best offer. It's your first offer, and for now, it's your best offer. Until you get a second offer, it's your only offer. So work with it. Is kind of the theory. So the agents who were new agents went back and got an appointment with the seller. The seller signed the rejection form, which actually I'll show you. We can refresh how a seller does that. But before sending it over, the seller agreed to have a meeting to discuss it. So I don't know the outcome of the meeting yet, but remember those three things. That would you rather be firm on some offers or flexible on none? And first offer, best offer. And I forget what the third one was, but let's go to actually, we'll go back to these RPA here. And what happens when the seller rejects an offer? Well, you reject it down here in the signature blocks for the seller. Here, offer not accepted, seller initials, and you put in the date. So that's how you would officially kind of reject an offer. But don't encourage rejections unless you have some other theory, some other plan for moving ahead. Okay. Let's see. Right. Curtis says after 40 years, it's still the correct price. Yeah, well, the correct price is the one that which the property will trade, right? We got to find that. We had a client or an agent who represents a seller. They got an offer from a buyer. The buyer's agent's firm is from Southern California, and they have a whole bunch of forms that are non-CA forms that they want signed by our seller. And our seller, the question was, does our seller have to sign those? And we call these proprietary forms. Sometimes we have some of our own, I think. So is the other side of the transaction required to sign proprietary forms? No, not really. Does it hurt? Not often. They're pretty innocuous, but it's not a requirement. And if the seller doesn't want to sign them, doesn't have to. But we do want them to sign certainly all the statutory required forms and the other suggested CAR forms that are part of the typical package, buyer-seller package. If the buyer, either buyer or seller, don't want to sign those, we document that, that we asked them to sign them, that they refused to sign them against our advice, and, so forth and so on. So we do that. We have a transaction where we're representing a property that's being represented by a trustee. Trustees never lived in the property. He's an independent trustee. And our TC sent the trustee all our normal forms. Well, the trustee is not required to sign all our normal forms. The only thing the trustee really needs to sign is the ESD, the exempt seller disclosure. I told our agent, and he's perfectly within his rights, agreeing, not wanting to sign all those forms, and just make a record. We have a record that our TC sent them to him. We have an email from him saying, I don't want to sign any of these forms, and I don't have to. And I said, that's our file. We'll tuck that in our file, and that'll be our basis for not having those forms from him.
Couldn't we tell the TC that they don't need all those other forms before they get sent?
In this case, our agent didn't communicate that to the TC. The TC may have not have noticed that there was a trustee, or what the trust was. Some trustees are exempt and some aren't.
Well, exactly. But I think if you tell them they're not, then
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that would be certainly a smart thing to do and save our TCs the effort of sending them out. So yeah, that's a good.
Then having to go, say that they were sent,
Right.
in error, which is
Right.
not a good thing to tell anybody.
Yeah, that's good. Any other questions on that? Question came up this week about one of our agents wanted to hold an open house for a friend of theirs who's with another brokerage. Our legal counsel suggests that's not a practice we want to undertake. So we don't do open houses for other brokerages. We don't have other broker agents do open houses for our firm. So that's our practice as indicated by our legal counsel. Okay, let me share another form that came up. We are going to co-list the property with another brokerage. And then if we're co-listing agent, actually, we can hold open house because we're co-listing agent. And this is the form, the ABA, in which we have an agreement to do the listing. And it also provides for the buyer representation agreement if we're going to co-represent a buyer, and there's a buyer representation agreement. but typically it's used in the listing. It shows the broker number 1, broker number 2, and then the compensation breakdown. In this case, I think it's a 75-25, to broker number 1, 75-25 to broker number 2, just that was the arrangement. And equally or jointly share responsibility, and put in other terms there, or other terms in attached agreement. So this is how we would share a listing or share a buyer. And there's another form that's similar to this called the AAA. And it's the additional agent acknowledgement. And this would be where we weren't perhaps a co-agent at the start, but we want to inform, now we're a co-agent, we want to inform everyone that we are. So you can use this additional agent acknowledgement. So, I mean, we may have like that ABA form for the listing, but then we want to inform the buyer that they there is a co-agent involved in the listing. They wouldn't know that necessarily. So then you would just do this AAA form and have the buyer sign it.
Even if it's with an agent in our own company, we still need to do that?
No,
Okay.
you wouldn't need to do that. No. This is if an agent is sharing it from outside the company.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Buyer claim. We have I got an email last night from an agent, said they represented buyer, they heard from the buyer. The buyers incurred a bunch of expenses for defaults on the property that they believe the seller didn't disclose. Have we ever heard of this scenario before?
Yep.
Yep. The agent said, I know, I have to suggest that they contact legal counsel, but can I help them in any other way? So this is what I wrote to them this morning. You can suggest that they fully document their claims before they craft a letter and send it to the seller. The proper way to communicate it would be for the buyer to prepare a letter and full documentation and to send it to you, and you send it to the listing agent for conveyance to the seller. I'd also suggest you read the mediation language in the RPA to them and make sure that they know how that works, that they can go to small claims court if the claim is less than $10,000. And that would be a lot less expensive than mediation, which will likely run $3,000 plus or minus for each party, plus attorney's fees. So those steps we can take and just counsel the buyer in that way. But the buyer should prepare the letter and get all their documentation and send it through the agents. That's how we can help out. But we want to stay arm's length. Remember, our agency stops at the close of the transaction, even though we like to help our clients, after the transaction. We don't have an agency duty, a fiduciary duty after the close of escrow. So we're just being helpful, but we don't want to put ourselves in a fiduciary position by writing letters for them or anything like that. Any questions?
Garrett, I actually have a question about that because
Yeah, Yvonne.
I understand that the agency stops at the close, but we've certainly seen lots of legal problems that come along after, and the brokerages pretty much always get dragged into that. So it's just that always ties back to whatever happened during when we have our agency period. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And if we do anything after close of escrow, that would give the parties, any of the parties, suggestion that we're still in a fiduciary position, That would be like preparing letters or responding, doing research about problems, or even to the extent of one of our agents, over the years, he's a pretty handy guy.
I know who.
So yeah, right. As you know, I'm talking about. So he'd go climb on the roofs and try to find out where the roof was leaking. I said, no, don't do that, because then you represent yourself as a roofing expert, and we're gonna get pulled down the rabbit hole of being a roofing expert. And why did you could just see him in court? Why were you on the roof? We don't go on roofs. Okay. So
Okay,
yeah,
very clear.
we do get called into these, but we limit our exposure to the time of the transaction. And we don't
Okay.
try to increase our exposure by doing so after the transaction.
Right, let's put ourselves in more harm's way. Great.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
How do you, so I appreciate what you're saying, and I have certainly dealt with that agent. But how do you say something? Because you want to continue the relationship with them in case they want to buy something else or sell something. So what sort of language should you use so that you're safe with that regard without, taking responsibility?
So I think for, like I gave to this agent some suggestions, you communicate with them and be helpful. You
Mhm.
just don't take on any responsibilities, and you don't go to, they find that they're going to be, they need something at the county. And you can suggest like vendors, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, but always, try to suggest more than one vendor. Try to
True.
suggest three. So you can be helpful and to maintain that relationship. In this case, there's been no blame yet reflected to our agent. But as Yvonne says, often, the deeper these things go, the more as soon as this person hires an attorney, they're going to say, well, what did your agent say? And, or the other side is going to say, well, your agent did this wrong. So, we may get pulled into these things from time to time, but it shouldn't interfere. 90% of the time, it shouldn't interfere with your relationship with the client.
Yeah. Okay.
My experience. 10% of the time it does, and they think we're responsible too.
Yeah. I've heard they go where the money is.
Yeah, exactly. And, the attorney says, well, they have insurance for this, so okay. Yeah. Well, okay. We've got a webinar coming up. Let's see, what did I do with that? All right, hold on one second.
Next week,
Yeah.
Monday.
Right. It's next Monday. I just want to put it on here just so I could show you what is being covered. You see the flyer now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the Shannon Jones. No, Shannon's our attorney. CAR legal counsel June Barlow, and she's going to talk about legal challenges to broker compensation, how the class action lawsuits will impact me. What does larger brokers potentially leaving NAR mean? Will MLS offers of compensation to buyer brokers end? Will I need to start using buyer broker representation agreements? So these are all timely things. You probably are getting notices about lawsuits that are taking place in Indiana and elsewhere against and settlements. Actually, the larger brokerages anywhere, our parent franchise company and Remax have actually spent hundreds of millions of dollars settling these lawsuits. And why is that? Well, they feel it's probably less expensive than taking them through litigation. That is normally the balancing act. But anyway, these things, and I don't know exactly where all these lawsuits are, what they're going to do to our industry. It's kind of a question mark. So it'll be timely to hear from the legal counsel for CAR certainly, even if a firm or many firms are deciding to leave NAR, I mean, CAR's main service to us is ZipForms, right? And all the lobbying they do and the legal stuff. So we would still want to support and be members of CAR. And is there a nexus that we would have to be, members of NAR? All that's going to be resolved down the road. So it's a timely webinar. Tune into it. You got to register, pre-register. I'll put that link in the when I send out the recording again. And yeah, it's online. Yeah, the class is online. So sign up for that. Last thing I have is Roger Savvy was speaking to our Humboldt group earlier this week and said, run through the finish line. If we aren't doing business, staying busy in this time of the year, even if we aren't doing transactions, but we're staying busy with our clients and contacting our clients and sending them notices and doing our contact work, then we won't have any business in the first quarter when business picks up again. So keep up your efforts through this time, even though the transactions volume is down. Stay busy contacting your SOI. And it's a good time, this time of year is a good time to think about your business plan for 2024. Look at your activity for 2023. Where did it come from? How many transactions you did? How many do you want to do in 2024? What is that going to require? And keep, we'll have some planning sessions on business planning here in the next month or two. But start thinking about that on your own and being ready for the next year. We hope interest rates will come down and buyers will get off the fence, bring more inventory. So that'll all be good. All right, that's all I got for today. Got through in 40 minutes, not too bad. Any questions?
No.
No. Okay.
It's nice to have you back.
Well, thanks. Appreciate it. And,
Okay.
yeah, keep at it out there. It's the old Chinese saying, there's a symbol for crisis, and there's two symbols that make up the symbol for crisis. And the first, it means crisis. The second symbol is opportunity. So crisis and opportunity. Remember the opportunity that comes even in a difficult market, and keep working at it. Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.